To give it a more broad context, I would refer to scrying as spirit perception, full stop, using the full, and I hate how much of a buzzword this is, but there's no other way to say it, the full somatic suite of the body's senses.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today, we welcome back to the show Alexander Moore. Alexander is a practicing esotericist with over 2 decades of active experience in several occult systems, including Solomonic Magic, Conjure, and other folk practices and traditional witchcraft. He is proud to provide coaching, mentorship, and divination for occultists who are interested in taking their magic and their lives to the next level in a changing world. In today's show, however, we're going to focus on scrying, and Alexander takes us through the process, the methodologies of scrying, some of the background to it, and explains why he sees this as spirit perception, which uses the full range of the body's somatic senses. Now in the Plus show, we get into wealth magic, road openers, and crossroad adventures and discuss interactions with crossroad spirits. Alex also gives us his list of essential texts, some of which you can find in the show notes below. We also discuss the difference between nature versus urban spaces and magical practice, and Alexander takes us through an amazing experience he had with a ritual from the Book of Oberon. It's good stuff, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, simply click on the links below and come and join the Patreon. You'll get all the bonus shows, all the extended Plus shows, and lots more bits and bobs. Now, I must add my book, Song of the Dark Man for the Witches, is out in August. So if that takes your fancy, then do check that out. And other than that, let's get on with the show. Okay. Alexander Moore, it is lovely to have you back on the Spirit Box. Nice to see you, my man.
Love to be here, man. Love to be here.
Great stuff. So, one of the reasons I asked you to come back on the show was to talk really about some of the work that you do, some of the training you give, particularly around scrying, and that was an area of interest for me personally. It's not something that I've partaken in properly, so I kind of wanted to I suppose actually to orientate people if they haven't heard you before. Why don't you tell them, to people a little bit about who you are, what you do, and let's get into scrying after that.
All right, well, my name's Alexander Moore. I'm the second half of Practical Occult. I'm the guy on the website that does the classes, does the divination, does the spell work for hire, does the personal coaching. I've been a practicing occultist and esotericist for 23, almost 24 years. I do all kinds of fucking magic. Like to give you a list would just sound like that guy who's rattling off some stuff. I've been very fortunate to be able to prioritize this for the majority of my life. That's the only reason I've gotten to do as much as I've gotten to do is because I made decisions that shouldn't have worked out, but I used magic to make them work out. So
Nice. Well, you're very, very welcome back on the show, and so I suppose let's kick off with what is scrying?
Well, all right. So the funny thing is, and one of my students said this the other day about how I'm one of the biggest bubble bursters that she's ever trained with in terms of magic. So I fall into the category of I push people to be like, no, all the crazy fairy tale shit can be real, full stop. Like you can do crazy awesome shit, but I think it's often described wrong and discussed in ways that don't do people a good service. Like so scrying broadly speaking is perceiving spirits,
Okay.
visually and auditorily, through use of a show stone, a mirror, the back of your finger nail, and all sorts of stuff. However, to give it a more broad context, I would refer to scrying as spirit perception, full stop, using the full, and I hate how much of a buzzword this is, but there's no other way to say it, the full somatic suite of the body's senses. Um, and the reason I bring that up is because a lot of occultists just straight up don't tell you the truth about a lot of things. And again, I will say you can learn, almost anyone can learn to see spirits as clearly as you are seeing me on a computer screen, as clearly as you are hearing me now. You can learn to do these things. It takes time and practice, but the thing is, it's not a zero or thing. It's a spectrum of perception. So the reason why I always bring this up is like if you're fortunate to talk to like a proper shaman of various kinds, from anywhere that like they learn how to do this stuff, maybe it's Nepal, maybe it's Peru, maybe it's Tunguska, whatever. They'll speak to you in very blunt. Yesterday I was a bird, and when I was a bird, I spoke to the spirit of this tree. And when I was speaking to the spirit of this tree, it told me secrets about the stock market, right? And what so you hear that, and they're being very like, this is my lived experience, this is my perceived experience. What a more Western occultist would perceive that as is you astral projected, took the form of a bird, and experienced the tree spirit all while entering a deep trance state. Now, again, that doesn't mean it's not exactly what this guy said it was. He just perceives it differently because he doesn't have the bullshit wrapped around it. He's like, no, I fucking did it. Like, I did it, and just because you can't do it doesn't mean I am not going to celebrate the fact that I can. And I really appreciate that kind of thing. But in general, a lot of occultists, when they experience spirit contact, it usually happens somewhere between I'm having a remarkably vivid daydream that happens to be tenable and accurate, all the way to telekinetic shit happened and I saw spirits and I heard them and all manner of stuff went down. And again, anywhere in between. And sometimes, this is something that no one will tell you in any book, at least I've not read it, sometimes it flickers between. I've had moments where I've seen a spirit in a mirror, and then it was like the mirror flickered like a monitor that wasn't working, and then the mirror was just a mirror, but the spirit was in my head and I saw a vision, and then I saw a light around the mirror, and then I saw a vision again, and then it seemed like a daydream because I couldn't hold on to it, because crucially a big part of the practice is being able to follow where the spirit is, where the vision is, because it's utilizing your visionary capacity to see this. People like Agrippa talk about this, people in all sorts of Eastern magical systems. I think they have a better grasp on explaining it in a tenable way. Like, your visionary capacity on the back of your eye is where your forehead is. If you look up, you'll see it. That kind of thing. They'll be like, yeah, that's your scrying device, for lack of a better word, right? That's your thing. And it is. It can be. But for some reason, when you read the grimoires, it does say, like, no, the shit's just going to be there. And again, as with most of the grimoires, that's describing an ideal, best case scenario situation where everything worked out. Rarely ever does everything work out perfectly. That does not mean that it isn't good. And I want to, just give every listener the permission for the sigh of relief. If your shit hasn't been perfect, it doesn't mean you were wrong. If you're like, I've only ever experienced them as very vivid daydreams, you're not wrong if you're not wrong. Do they tell, and this is the thing I teach in my training, get spirits to tell you shit that you don't know. Verifiable things. Like, get a friend, for example, to hide an item somewhere in their house. And if you summon a spirit, be like, where did they put the book? And if the spirit can't tell you, then you're probably having a daydream.
Mhm.
But if the spirit can tell you and you're right, well, there you go. Now, a clever individual might ask what the difference between that remote viewing and a person's divinatory capacities are. That's a great fucking question. It's all the same thing, kind of, much like in martial arts. Every martial art has punching, kicking, throwing, grappling, and stabbing. It all builds on the same core skill set. And so to that same end, I would say that those of us who are more psychically gifted naturally than others have an easier time. Again, just like there's a spectrum of experience, there's a spectrum of natural talent
Mhm.
towards this. And I have endeavored with my own training methods to start people at zero and build them. Because from my experience teaching people, and more specifically learning how to do this from, thankfully, teachers who told me the truth in ways that, like, it wasn't that big a deal. I didn't need to stress quite so much. Because again, you'll have, and this is especially true in the grimoire community. You'll have people, and it's like whenever you read, I always find this funny. You read someone's account of grimoire stuff, and they will have these like huge walls of perfectly remembered text from a spirit. But then you ask them, "Oh, do you have an eidetic memory of like what we talked about over coffee the other day?" And they'll be like, "No." And I'm like, "Right. So you somehow remember everything you were told from the spirit. And I'm not saying these experiences aren't remarkable enough that you will remember more, but to think it's perfect, that always struck me as just straight up bullshit.
Right.
It's not, but again, this also goes into things. So, like, a bit of a cheat for people for free. Learn automatic writing. Everyone and their dog is going to get up in arms and be like, that's some new agey bullshit. But trance possession, two-headed possession, um, mediumship, it all works on the same thing. If mediumship is automatic talking because you've channeled a spirit and it speaks through you, mediumship too can be automatic writing. So if you're speaking, for example, with an angel doing the Trithemius operation and you can't see it, but you really need to know some shit, and you get your automatic writing down, you can grab hold of the spiritual message given, transcribe it, and actually have a better, more tenable, more actionable result than someone who just has a weird visionary experience and can't remember a lot of it or can't hold on to it. Because again, full disclosure, these experiences, when you do get the big ones, are huge, especially early on. This is why so many people will get told something by an angel and become religious, because it's the most powerful, faith affirming, experience affirming, spiritual
Sure.
thing that they've had yet. And they forget things like spirits have agendas, even the ones you like. And just like your very best friend shouldn't be able to guide and govern your life with their opinions, neither should your spirits. Because many spirits have never been human. They don't understand us. They don't understand the fact that our world right now is entirely different than the world 5 years ago. All sorts of
Right.
shit. So to that end, my answer is scrying is spirit perception and the training thereof and figuring out how that works with you and how to build it. But again, crucially, there's no one right way. And I want to really make this firm with people because people have lived their whole lives in magic, especially being like, I'm less of a magician because I can't see the shit in a mirror as clearly as I could on Zoom. I was about to say Skype, which ages me. But truly, like, I can't see it like I could on Zoom, and
Yeah.
I'm just not that guy. I just don't have it, and it's like, yeah, well, very few of us get that every time. And are there those out there who do? Sure.
Hmm.
Do I more often than not? Probably 55% of the time, and that is amazing to
Hmm.
me that I'm even able to do that.
Interesting. Interesting. And when we were kind of setting up the show, I mean, the most kind of famous like scrying case that I could think of was John Dee and Edward Kelly and the kind of
Sure.
the obsidian mirror, which is in the British Museum, by the way,
Oh yeah.
which is pretty awesome. Um, but you mentioned a contemporary today,
Mhm.
Arthur Gauntlet, if I'm
Yeah, yeah,
correct.
yeah, yeah. I believe Arthur Gauntlet was contemporary to John Dee. I may actually be wrong on that with my history, but he was an occultist
Right,
who was also in England working. He was, a cunning man and like a working
right, okay,
occultist, and he had descriptions in the book that writes about him where he would summon like planetary spirits
right.
and would come back day after day after day and continue to do the ritual. And
Hmm.
I really hope I'm getting that one right. I hope it's him and not someone else I'm thinking of. And if it is someone else, someone in the comments will tell me I'm an idiot, and that's fine. I can be an idiot. Um, but in general, the point is there was a lot to the whole keep coming back, do the thing, summon the spirit, see and communicate with them. And the whole John Dee and Edward Kelly thing I always find interesting because Dee could not see the spirits. He
Hmm.
was ostensibly an effective magician who could get shit done, but he couldn't perceive them. Edward Kelly was naturally psychic but could perceive them. And also the scryer conjurer setup is effective for a reason because, like I said, with the whole you're not going to remember fucking everything. And I've worked on both sides of this. I've been the conjurer, I've been the scryer, working in groups of two or more with people. And oftentimes when I've been the scryer, I don't remember a lot of what I saw or said. It's sort of like when I do divinations for clients. Sometimes it's just in one ear and out the other, and it's
Hmm.
spirit talking through me. And they're like, "You remember that thing?" And I'm like, "Nah." And but the conjurer will be furiously taking notes and asking questions through you. And I believe personally that in the case of medium of scrying like that, it is halfway between having seen some things, not
Right.
as clearly as Kelly perhaps, but having seen and experienced some things, But it's interesting because that was the way it was done ideally, right? And you see a lot of the thing, a lot of like in the hygromantia, when it would talk about like using child scryers because of their
Yeah.
purity, for whatever reason, in some of those spaces, the training to be able to make a person that way. Um, because again, like we have plenty of psychic development training programs in the East and the West now that will get you up to speed. Of course, you must be diligent, and it takes a little longer than people realize. But yeah, I think that it's interesting that um, back in the day, people had specialties and they didn't appear, at least as far as we know, to be that put off by I can't see them very well. They were like, I'll just find someone who can. Whereas
Right.
today there's a more emotional component to it. And I think again that's because of internet culture and exaggeration
Right.
on just how often they succeed because nobody wants to seem less than.
Right. Okay. It's interesting. I didn't realize that kind of that child intermediary was used in Europe as well. I know it was common in terms of you as an intermediary between magicians, Arabic magicians
Mhm.
consulting
Yeah,
jinn, using jinn to like a child holding a kind of a some ink in their hand or like a dark liquid where
yeah, yeah.
the child would scry it. You know, a prepubescent boy is what they
Yeah,
tend to do.
I've definitely read about that as well. But no, you have records of that in pretty much everywhere, honestly.
Okay.
And I think it's one of those ubiquitous things where like the pure vessel, as weird as that is to say in current
Yeah.
era, was considered more utilitarian in that way,
Right.
simply because they didn't need to be taught or prepped or put in anything beyond the basics. And I think that that just goes to show how we've changed our perceptions on these things. I don't think we've changed for the worse. I think it's better
Hmm.
to utilize the vast array of resources we have to train yourself now
Yeah.
than do all that. But yeah, you definitely had that
Hmm.
for sure.
So, in terms of like, I mean, you mentioned it kind of was fairly universal to that practice we just mentioned there,
Mhm.
but is there like a bead on where like scrying originated? Is it tradition specific or is it fairly universal?
I would argue, at least in my opinion and knowledge, it seems to be fairly universal. It seems like people using pools of water, or again, like the slicked up back of their thumb, um, you know, uh, obsidian glass, the space behind their eyes, mirrors of various kinds, vernal pools in a forest, pretty much anything has been used as a medium for this. I mean, people will scry in fire, for example. They'll, smoke, all sorts of stuff. I mean, so many things can be mediums for spirit contact and communication. And I think that because of the nature of how spirits manifest, which my working theory and the theory of many I respect is that they engage with our visionary capacity. Because, like, and again, I'll straight up admit this, I have recorded myself doing an evocation. Now, I tried to record myself doing an evocation several times and just failed because I knew I was being recorded. But the one time it succeeded, I watched the footage back, and I look like an insane person mumbling when I remember speaking at a normal volume in an empty
Right.
room, where there are weird things moving a little bit. Like there's like a tapestry that's moving and there's no wind, there's no air conditioning at
Right.
that point in time. But I remember seeing a thing and seeing it move and manipulate things. So I believe that they enter our visionary capacity, which again, the visionary capacity receives, the imaginal capacity sends, just like our ears receive, our voice sends. And I believe that that's how they engage with us. And I think that using props or supports aids us in this. Now, do I think that one is more magical than the other? Not unless you make it that way. I mean, you have Franz Barden talking about fluid condensers, that you could add to mirrors, and I found that to be effective. I
Right.
think it's because you've enchanted things. I mean, you also have American conjure traditions where they would make a certain oil lamp with a certain formula in the base, sort of like a mojo bag and a candle spell have a baby, and they would scry the lacuna of the oil lamp to see spirits. Like they'd bring it to a cemetery and light it. And this is the thing I have done. I do. Um, and you'll see that there's also the altered state effect where you fast for grimoire stuff, you pray, you make yourself pure. My opinion to that, though, a bit of an unpopular one is I think that's more for your protection against certain spirits than your ability to see them. But I may be wrong on that. I may be half right. But there's a lot people have done. But like for example, if you go to like tantric stuff and you do tumo for 30 or 45 minutes and you open your eyes and you do your ritual, you're going to be feeling it. You know what I mean? You're going to be lit up and able to see and perceive everything better because you've purified your etheric body. Similarly, and this is a bit of advice I give for people when they're like, if you could tell me one thing to make me good at seeing spirits, what should I do? And I'm like, learn to astral project. It's hard. It will kick the shit out of you. Everyone has a hard time doing it. It's painfully difficult because if you can do that and then you can literally just poke your head forward astrally, you can see things better. And
Yeah.
again, you're looking at 6 months to a year of hard work to be able to do it, but that time's going to pass anyway, so you might as well use it well.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I believe our ability to engage with that well trained. Also, if you hear noise outside, it's because they're landscapers. I don't know if
That's
that's
cool.
gonna
No worries. Yeah, it's grand.
awesome. That's great
Can't
because
hear anything.
it seems super loud from here. But anyway, in my opinion, to go back to your question, I think it's a fundamental ability people have that they have found ways to facilitate greater training depending on their bioregion, their
Mhm.
culture, their history, and what and opportunity,
Okay.
right? I think that there's a lot of that. Now, I will also say that I believe that you had people who were more likely to be better at it in times of yore, not because they were more magical, but because we had fewer distractions, like simply like for example, less light pollution
Yeah.
is the thing. Because anyone who's ever like gone out to the forest in a cabin with no electricity and done magic realizes it hits a lot harder, and not just because you're a little bit spooked, but
Yep.
because it's different out there, which is why so many people will use all sorts of magic to facilitate enchanting their ritual space to better manifest spirits because you needn't do that in certain places.
I'm so glad you said that. Because it's something that as I mean, I always bitch about social media on the podcast. Um, for the obvious reasons.
Mm,
Like, but beyond that, like one of the things I talk about in my book is actually the impact of digital spaces. In that kind of, as just as you put it, they're a distraction. I don't want to kind of like labor the point. Oh, it's bad, it's good or bad, whatever. It's just a tool, or it's just a thing. You
right.
know. But if your awareness is completely captured by it,
Hmm.
then you're not doing other stuff. And I think where you've got magical practice that do have a requirement for mental discipline
Hmm.
and repetitive practice, it makes quite a difference if you're completely absorbed into digital spaces. But that aside, your point about being in nature, or being in wild places or remote places, it does
Hmm.
hit harder. And like the 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 pokiest rituals that I've been involved in or work that I've been involved in have always been in remote places, and they have hit differently, and they have, for all intents and purposes, worked. A connection was made, communication was reached, um, and I might be deeply naive in saying this, but it does seem to have something to do, or at least separation from human places seems to have an impact.
I would agree. I think that I mean also similarly enough, like for example, like if you're doing like full Goetia, like an abandoned mental hospital is actually a great place to summon those spirits and like a place where
Yeah,
people have been murdered and things.
yeah,
If you're a spicy guy and you can find an open crypt in a cemetery that people don't look after very well, that's another place to do
yeah.
magic. And it's not to say that you can't, of course, it's not to say that you can't in places, but like using the grimoire example, because I find it the most germane to this, what would take you maybe 3 hours of repetitive conjuring in your basement in your home, which again, you'll still get the same spirit, may take you 30 minutes in the forest.
Right, right.
And I mean that's the difference. Now not everybody can go do that depending on where they
Mhm.
are. And again,
Yeah, yeah.
use what you have the best you can, which is why these supplemental practices are important. But if you want the big bells and whistles and stuff, go out there. Just understand that one thing I will say, one thing I will caution, because I've known people to do this. They are stronger out there. So,
Yeah.
tread lightly and keep your shit together and follow the directions if you're doing
Mm.
something, because you call something in a place that it wants to be, that it has an easier time manifesting. It is harder to get to do what you want to do if your goal is, for example, to bind it, if you're using grimoire magic, or if your goal is to experience it. Because, like, for example, having worked things from, say, the Book of Oberon in my basement in a suburb,
Yeah.
and then Allegheny National Forest, the shit I saw in the forest, and I've been doing this a long time. It's
Yeah.
one of those things that, like, you feel your balls retract up into you, and you're like, oh shit, like, you know what I mean. And it's not your first rodeo. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. I mean, it can get scary because
Yeah. Fucking right. Yeah.
you go out there and you're like, oh fuck, it's all right, boys, we're here. You know what I mean? And so there's definitely that. But to the end of spirit perception, pretty much, because everyone has their prescription about what makes it stronger, what makes it better. Diet, environment, screen time, sleep, hygiene, all these things, and all these things are true. None of them, in my opinion or experience, are more true. But to that end, I still think that repetitive practice, because you talk about like social media, for example, and as someone with ADHD, I worked hard to do like the Barden hold a thought in your mind for whatever
Yeah.
time exercises longer than a lot of people I know. Like, it took me longer because I have a harder time focusing. It was
Yeah.
definitely worth it. But you can get out of shape with those things. And I found when doing scrying exercises, when you're trying to be in a trance state, and I'll get to that in a second, because the trance state, in my opinion, is the silver bullet. But you're trying to be in a trance state, and you're trying to have this like soft focus, but not so much focus, but definite focus. You're trying to oscillate between them. If you're too accustomed to like screen time, like, and this is a good litmus test. If you cannot read a normal sized blog post without feeling mental fatigue, you need to change that about yourself. You need to sit back. And again, I understand this sounds like, older millennial shakes fist at clouds, but we didn't have this problem in the live journal era, when you'd read your
Yeah.
friend's Russian novel of a post about their day and be like, how insightful. But truly, concentration training and all sorts of stuff is really good. But so the whole trance state thing, and this is the thing I also want to bring home. Whatever method you can do to train getting into a workable trance state as quickly as you can, and crucially operating physically while still in it, is what you need to do for better spirit perception in general. And I mean, like, can you go into, for example, what's called an alpha state and move around in it without it breaking? Can you like make an omelet while in trance? Which is an exercise I had to do. It wasn't actually omelet, it was scrambled eggs. But the point is, like, can you do that? Can you operate
Right.
in that state? Because if you can, your rituals are going to be a lot easier. It's going to work a lot faster, and you're going to perceive spirits a lot better. But people, again, when you read a lot of these books, no one just straight up says that. At least no one that I can think of. And again, if I'm wrong, I would love to be wrong. I would love to be wrong about that. But you don't see it very often. You don't see that thing occurring and people talking about that. And that's how I was taught. Like, that's the biggest thing. I try to teach people how I was taught, because I was taught really worked for me and others. And again, a lot of it is learning different methods, trying different people's shit, and seeing what works for you too. Like, I
Right.
can't stress that enough. You're going to have to shop around, so to speak, and practice and try, and you're going to need to deal with disappointment. That's another thing. Like, dealing with the fact that you're going to be conjuring, say, 5, 6 times in a row, doing the full ritual, and you may hear nothing, you may see nothing,
Mm.
and you can't be a fucking quitter. Like, you gotta keep at it. I mean, if you want this shit, if you want essentially these cool powers, which is what they are, you have to want it bad enough to keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That makes an awful lot of sense. Um, just circling back, you mentioned, well, I think you're doing some Book of Oberon stuff
Yeah,
in
I've done. Yeah,
yeah. Well, you mentioned you saw some shit.
I
That sounds
did.
a very tempting avenue to go down if you're
I
comfortable
mean, I can
sharing.
I can tell a little bit about it. So essentially, there are obviously rituals in the text to summon certain spirits, certain spirits that are considered fairies. Obviously, depending on who you talk to, if you have like very fairy enthusiast occultists, they'll be like, "That's not actually a fairy. That's a demon pretending to be a fairy." And you said it was a fairy. It didn't feel like a demon. It did different shit. Whatever it was different than what I had encountered before I had done the Book of Oberon. This is a couple of years ago that
Right.
I did this particular thing. And crucially, I had summoned this spirit in my home. The spirit appeared in the glass like a small child, gave me a cool familiar, did cool stuff. Well, but anyway, so you do the ritual, and then you see people. You see what seems like a small group of people surrounding you, and you see the same little boy. Again, you feel very physically surrounded by multiple presences, and you're just a dude in a circle, and you're like, shit, because it's almost like there's like an approach anxiety, like a very visceral, like nervous system response of I'm surrounded by potentially hostile intelligent beings that I can fucking see. And when
Hmm.
one of them moves, you hear a twig snap because it like stepped on it, and you're afraid. You feel this feeling. And again, you may have some occultists who will tell you they've experienced that and they're like, I felt no fear and I felt lovely for you, my dude. Couldn't be me. Again, but again, I ain't no quitter. So I
Yeah.
stayed and I did the ritual because you got him, you're there now. But at
Mm.
the same time, you feel this very, and again, even after that, even after I sent the spirits away, license to depart, it felt different. Like I couldn't sleep in the woods that night.
Right.
I couldn't, and when I was leaving, animals looked strange. And I can't even describe how they look strange, but there were more of them than there should be.
Mm.
They looked different. And for days afterwards, there were certain signs and omens. And I'm accustomed to signs and omens because I do magic for a living. I do it a
Yeah.
lot. I have a lexicon of omens that my spirits and I work with. But this is different. You see things that just look strange. You see, like one thing I will say that I saw is you don't get ravens in the United States. You get
Really?
crows.
Okay.
When you see a big fucking, you see a
Yeah.
raven, you're like, that's not supposed to be there. And then it like follows you, like you're on a walk around your neighborhood and it's following you.
Mm.
And then you come back around and then there's a skeleton key on the road up to your house. And you take the key and then you scry the key, like you use your visionary capacity, your psychometry perhaps on the key, and you see the raven. And I still have that key, and I've used it in Magic a lot, and it can summon a spirit that is sort of like a raven and sort of like a person wearing a raven for a suit. But the thing is, you give it, and it's like, because the thing is, part of what I asked for is I'm like, I would like another familiar, please, and
Mhm.
there it might be, anchored indeed to this thing. And and it's funny because I did some dream incubation with the key, and it was like one day you'll find a door that this key opens, and it will not be in your home, it will be in where this book was from, so like in the British Isles.
Oh,
And
wow,
so
okay.
one day I may find an old door that this thing opens, and I was told, behind the door is treasure for you, but also, you know something will have to be left behind. And so it's one of those like fairy riddle things where you're like, oh shit,
Yeah, yeah.
but when you're in deep, you don't want to leave it behind.
Sure, sure. Well, that sounds amazing. Yeah, that sounds incredible. When I've done ritual work out in remote places, it has been pretty impactful. I mean, I talk about
Mm,
one in particular in the book, basically with two witch friends, um, essentially calling the dark man as to kind of what do you want with us,
mhm,
you know. And I use some kind of like Cornish magic, Gemagari stuff.
mhm.
We use some Typhonian calls, that kind of thing. Like in a proper, it was like something out of a horror films, like rolling mist in this,
Oh shit. Okay.
across the
Yeah.
moor, and then the wind stopped. When it stopped dead, I heard like a baby cry, dogs barking, heard laughing.
Mhm.
And then we got kind of the spirit communication. But it was wild,
Oh, it
and
sounds it.
it was one of those ones though. It was like, you know, aside from being kind of having to be prepared, get yourself together, all that kind of stuff, it's the courage, needed. I mean, I'm not particularly experienced, so it was like, I had to really fucking, really grab my balls and go for it. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
so uh, it was very impactful, particularly in that setting. Like a really, it felt very, very primal. Um, and equally, as you were saying, I couldn't sleep afterwards at all. Like, I was just really, really wired. But I also felt that it was like my nervous system got buzzed. You
Oh
know,
yeah. Oh
you
yeah.
know,
It'll do that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I was just wired afterwards.
And that's another thing too. The more
Mm.
you do this stuff, the more you have these experiences. I don't want to say the easier they are to have, but the more common they become.
Right, and you recognize it, I guess.
Yeah, you do because again, you recognize because there's a feeling of I think Stephen Skinner called it spiritual tension.
Right.
There's this feeling where you sense the magic coming at you. You sense something approaching. You sense things rising. You feel this moment where you're like, oh shit, I couldn't stop it now if I wanted to. Like you
Hmm.
call it and it's coming. And you have to and then your job is to prepare to receive whatever it is.
Yeah.
There'll be like an energy in the room and it will change your feeling and it will change your perceptions of things and all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And there's so many different ways you can perceive it. But that's another thing that I teach is like learning the signs. Because
Right.
again, it starts slow. It starts if you can't see them at all yet, no worries. Like we'll get you learned up. But um it starts with things like using divination to speak with spirits and using automatic writing because those things facilitate the flow of the perception in you because again most people can't easily access the wilderness to do stuff. And frankly, and again, I don't, and I mean this with my whole chest when I say this, it does not make you less of a magician if you're like, I'm just not doing it. Because again, like, well, if I go into the forest, I'm American as shit. I have multiple guns. I have, like I have the ability to protect myself in a lot of ways. And I have some students who are disabled, for
Yeah.
example. We're
Yeah.
like, bro, how like one student of mine is in a wheelchair. And she was like, I'm not going to the forest anytime soon. And so in that case, you have to adapt. In her case, I'm like, then you need to
Yeah.
work harder on astral projection than other people would, because that's how you can go to the forest if that's what you need to do.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So there's a lot of that. So again, I always stress this in interviews. I don't want anyone to feel like
Excluded.
not just excluded, but I don't want you to feel like you have an excuse not to do this, to be
Okay.
honest.
Right. Right.
Because
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. If you want this, you can. I mean, there are people in temples that have electricity and everything that do nothing but meditate and have all these experiences. You can train your inner world to have these experiences, which again I think is funny because you want to talk about scrying, creating what we would I guess suppose in the West refer to as an astral temple or a personal mandala is a thing a lot of people do, and not just in tantric spaces. And there are plenty of quote soul mansions in witchcraft training that I've had that a person can access, which are essentially mandalas in the energy centers. But that's another thing. But I mean, that stuff is equally valid if and only if you train it. Like a lot of people will be like, "Oh yes, I'm having a very vivid daydream, and I think I'm in my like throat center having this experience of the spirit." And again, vetting, which is another thing with scrying. Just because a spirit tells you something doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's
Mm.
not bullshitting you, doesn't mean whatever. All the classic rules which you probably heard 1,000 times in other places apply. If you're only told what you want to hear, probably a lie, or you're deluding yourself. If you're told that you are the most special, awesome snowflake in the world, lie, deluding yourself. If you're told shit you don't want to hear, probably actually true. But again,
Yeah.
there are plenty of people. I mean, there are, and again, you have to look at your personality and your values versus the shit you fuck up. And again, this is not. I'm not one of those occultists who sits there and goes, "You need to be perfect. Your spirit's always going to test you to be perfect and better." Some might, some won't.
Right.
Some chose you for your worst and your best. Some just chose you for your worst, and some you didn't give a choice whether to choose you or not. And regardless, if you're only told the shit that even the criticism that you're okay hearing, like if you're a martial artist and the Archangel of Mars is like, you must train harder, and you're like, yes, daddy, of course I must train harder. Like, I just got told, I just got taken to task. It's like, no, you dickhead. Like, that's what you wanted to hear. But if you're told by the Archangel of Venus, stop cheating on your fucking wife, my dude, that might actually be some shit you probably should listen to that maybe you don't want to,
Yeah.
right? Like, you might be told something that's actually hard to hear,
Hmm.
but they'll look away from that because again, the human element of scrying that's the hardest is the human element of interaction that's the hardest. And that's like, you don't bullshit yourself.
Right.
Like, you're still just a random dickhead who takes a shit. Like, you're not that special, even if you're doing the coolest shit in the world, which is
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah.
So, like, remember that.
Yeah. That's right. It's really important for everyone to hear. I think
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
we
And again,
really
like,
believe our own bullshit an awful
oh
lot.
yeah, and you can be told wonderful, life affirming, awesome shit by spirits. I have absolutely. There are spirits who I trust. I vetted them.
Yeah.
If they tell me this person will betray you, this person is not good for you, I will actually give them a lot more rope, a lot more credence than
Mm.
the
Yeah.
spirit I just summoned is like, don't trust this person or whatever. Because it's like it's the same with divination too. And I say this as a professional diviner. No one bats 1,000. No one is always right. You got a lot of people out
Yeah.
there who say
Yeah.
they are, and okay, cool. I love that. I love that you believe that. But a lot of people will say that. And again, if you can't verify your divination, you don't know if it was right. Like if you have a divinatory client come to you
Yeah.
and you do a reading for them and they never follow up. Like I tell all my clients, follow up. Tell me if I was right. I keep a ridiculous spreadsheet and track my percentages like a fucking psychopath. Like but if you don't ever get it back, you don't know. You don't know if you're right. Doesn't matter if you were right 50 times before that. You don't know. And you need to know because as real as this shit is, and it is, and as powerful as this shit is, and it is, and as crucially folklorically and fairy tale amazing as it can be, and it should be, you still need to have your head on your shoulders about it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. And kind of when I first started having the kind of meteor
Mhm.
experiences, like I did some shit testing,
Oh,
uh,
sure, you got to.
and came up trumps out of the fucking blue.
Mhm.
Right, like within 2 weeks, boom. You know, it was quite remarkable. Um, but yeah, pokey stuff.
Oh, dude, absolutely.
Yeah. I still like I'm still not 100% like even easy with the whole thing. Like I said, like you're a very experienced person. Um, I've kind of somehow managed to throw myself in the deep end to a degree. I say the deep end,
Mhm.
probably waist deep, really.
Well, no, well, that's the thing though too. Like the deep end is going to be different for everybody, but to
Yeah,
that end of like not being sure of it. So I grew up in it.
yeah,
Like I was lucky enough to never have the burden of proof because the people who raised me proved it to me early. That was a big thing for them. It was like
yeah,
this is real. This is the most real thing, and crucially the most important. I was lucky, but having had to educate people in terms of like being a teacher and having had to walk people out of that
yeah,
range, there is a sort of chasm that is a risky chasm to breach because, and again, I don't exist with any doubt in my mind. If I have a god, it is the fact that magic exists.
hmm,
But there is this other thing you can do where you can jump from mostly believing to completely believing and find yourself square into madness and delusion on the other side as well. So it's always that razor's edge you have to walk. And that's the problem with going deeper and deeper is you have experiences that are so powerful and so hard to deny that you can be told all kinds of shit. Like for example, and I entreat everyone listening to try this at home. Ask spirits about Atlantis. You will get some wild shit. And nobody's wild shit will match anyone else's wild shit.
right, okay,
You got to think about why that is.
right,
Because again, I have done this. I've asked plenty of spirits about Atlantis and other such things. I've asked spirits about, are there ice walls surrounding the flat earth? Is the firmament from the Bible real? Is the sky a crystal dome? All sorts of shit. Ask them that wild shit. Get it out of your system and then move about your life. Because remember, as real as this shit is, you still need to live in the world. Even those of us who have cool alternative jobs, you still go to the grocery store, you still do whatever. And most importantly, this is true of scrying because, crucially, it's not just that you can scry spirits. You can scry people, places, and things with that same visionary capacity that allows us to, for example, do remote viewing or psychometry. You can like I had a teacher who was very big on scrying people. Like, what is this person's secrets? What magic do they do? What spirits do they have around them? And it was the whole like put them in a sphere. This particular spirit, or this particular method is taught most often by Johannes Gadberg. I probably said his name wrong. Swedish trolldom guy. But I've learned it from other people in almost exactly the same way. But he's the one that teaches it in the way that you can like go buy it. And I know I'm so bad with Swedish names. I apologize to literally every Swede I know. But the thing is, like, this capacity to do this can give you such a leg up on the world, but then we have to also ask some pretty biting questions. Like, for example, why are there not more psychics, remote viewers, and whatever stock picking? Notice I say more, which is to say there are those who do,
Mhm.
and those who do effectively enough to make a living at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But why are there not more? And it's because it's a skill. And if you're only training this skill to 3 times a year go into a Solomonic circle and summon a spirit, that's fine. If it works, it works. And if you get what you want out of it, and if your life is really good, and crucially, if you are doing magic, you should be aspiring to have the best crazy pants life you can have. That is the thing I will say with my whole chest. If your life isn't awesome, that's okay.
Mhm.
You can make it awesome if you practice and you enchant aggressively.
Mhm.
But like, there's a thing. I mean, this is a skill that we train, a thing that, much like astral projection or other kinds of psychic skills, you need to be in shape at, which means you need to do it a lot.
Yeah.
Which is why regular communication with one's familiar spirits is a great way to train this, right? That kind of thing.
Mhm. I see. That's one thing about you that I really appreciate, Alex. Is that you've mentioned this a few times when you were last on the show. You said it as well. Is that, and I think it's a fabulous ethos of like, if you're not conjuring for your best life, why not? You know, um, because you see it a lot. You see like people who are, for all intents and purposes, adepts, what have you. But seem to be kind of trapped in quite kind of mundane circumstances. From the outside in, from the
Mhm.
observing from the outside, that could be completely wrong. What have you. But I think that ethos of like, well, how do you enchant your life to be full?
Mhm.
And whatever it is that kind of brings that fullness to you.
Oh, sure.
Not just material things, but like
Well, it's everything.
yeah.
That's my whole thing about it. It's everything. And honestly, and again, this is a thing that, again, I will say with my whole chest. I don't believe that a lot of occultists out there, even good ones, are willing to accept the fact that, while possible, caveat, it's extremely rare to get something from nothing. You need to be really good. Like, do I
Right.
know magicians who have done aggressive wealth magic pretty much for years on end until finally the universe heaved a great sigh and gave them money? Yes, I do. But are you willing to be unemployed or
Yeah.
critically underemployed doing nothing? But if you give your shit a path of manifestation, right? Like, you make a business, you do better for your life, you do whatever, you
Yeah.
can have that. And it's about momentum and inertia and things like that, and then chanting with that in mind. But to the end of scrying and how that fits into all of this, just like being good at divination, if you can know what is going to happen with a good amount of accuracy, it can be argued you need nothing else in life.
Mm,
If you
mm,
have if you can
mm.
see the map, right, and move in the terrain, then what else do you need? Of course, obviously, I think you should need all kinds of stuff, but that's the same thing. I mean, if you
Yeah.
have the ability to speak with spirits who can give you sound financial advice, who can give you because like what is success if not being at the right place at the right time?
Hmm.
And if you have a spirit or spirits that can be like, hey, this is the right place and this is the right, I'll give you a story about exactly that. So, guy I went to college with, and I won't give his name, but he kind of discovered that I do this stuff, and he was this great atheist, and he was like, I don't believe it. I do not believe in this stuff, and I challenge you to prove it. And I was, I gave more of a shit about proving it at that point. Now I get paid for it. But at the time, I did what I do. I did what I do well for free, which you should never do. Um, and I was like, fucking fine. And so I was like, what do you not have? And he was like, I want the girl of my dreams. Now, in the current era, Alex would have done a spell to summon him, a kind of person. What I did at the time was I went to one of my familiars and I was like, what do I do with this? And it simply said, he needs to go to this mall in this store on this day at this time and talk to the woman in red. And I was like, shit, that's very specific. All right, fuck it. And I was doubtful. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
fucking no. So I told him, like, do this, whatever. And he wasn't going to do it. I actually had to drag him there. Like, it was a bear of a time. And I shit you not, he walked into the store, which is not a store he would have gone into normally. And there was a woman in red, and they are married with children now. And to this day, he's like, I, there's so much more into the world. But that's the thing. I was able, because of a great
Yeah.
deal of practice,
Yeah.
to be able to receive a very specific information from a spirit like that.
Mm.
So think about this in terms of your life. If
Mm.
you want, extra physical pals, you want, spirit friends and companions and guardians and allies that you can have a conversation with, you got to learn.
Mhm.
You got to get learned the fuck up. You got to practice, and you'll get there. And again, I believe that almost anyone can do this. And just same with magic. The way I refer to it at this point is singing. I'm musically inclined, but I'm not a singer. I'm a guitar player. I can hold a tune though. Almost anyone could learn how to sing, but some people can fucking sing. And
Right.
some people are born with no vocal cords.
Hmm.
Are there people who have the magical equivalent of no vocal cords? Yeah, absolutely. They're like, to use a Warhammer phrase, they're like psychic blanks, you know, because Warhammer is life. But truly, like they're like psychic blanks, and I don't know what to do with a lot of them, to be honest. They're super
Yeah.
rare. I've only met a couple in my whole life, and I've only ever met one who really wanted to like learn magic. Now, the question often comes up though, people who have aphantasia, who can't visualize things in their mind. Um, and to that end, I would actually suggest another thing that I teach, which is again the feeling of spirits, the automatic writing, all this stuff, because that can translate into auditory, essentially auditory hallucinations that are true,
Hmm.
which can then later on grow, even in aphantasia laden people, into visual experiences. Which is interesting, because I do have a student who's like this, and he recently became able to scry. Not perfectly, not every time, but when he first saw it, he's like, "Holy shit! I cannot deny this is a thing because I can't have daydreams."
Yeah.
Which again, I could not imagine as a member of the maladaptive Daydream Nation. I couldn't imagine
Mhm.
not being able to do that.
Well, I think probably this is a good point to wrap things up. And um, for listeners who want want to learn more about what you do, or indeed take some of your courses, find you, follow you, where's
Yeah.
the best place for
Well,
them to do
so
so?
there's practicaloccult.com. That's where the courses are. That's where my articles are. That's where you can buy my business partner Allison Chakosky's talismans. They're the best.
Yeah.
That's great. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm the Hex Doctor, the underscore Hex Doctor. I will say, if you're not a fan of memes or Warhammer content or anime references, and the fact that I don't take magic that serious on the gram, and I will just goof off a lot, you'll find some interesting nuggets. I give a lot of like how-to stuff, and like this is how you would make like a lamp spell or whatever on there for free. Um, So but if you want to meme and dream with the best of us, you
Yeah.
can you can fucking oh shit, he got the pipe and everything.
I'm living the dream.
You gotta be. You gotta be.
Well, I'm a tremendous fan of your Instagram. You make me laugh all the time.
That's what I'm here for. Because again, I take what I do seriously. I don't take myself too seriously, and
Very
that's
strong meme game.
that,
Very
oh
strong.
no. Listen, I grew up on 4chan, bro. Like my meme game is fucking like primordial. Like I grew up on the best internet. I said what I said. Like
Love it. I love it. That's fucking awesome.
yeah, but that's where you can find me. That's the only places I am. I'm not really on Facebook much. If someone finds my Facebook, I'm not going to answer your friend request. I'm not on there
Yeah, cool.
terribly often, so that's not the place you want me.
Well, awesome. It's been great to have you back on the show. Really informative, really insightful as always. And let's do it again sometime in the future.
Dude, I look forward to it, man. Always happy.
All right. Thanks very much. Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you, Alex. I really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you all did too. Do check out the show notes below if you want to find out more about Alex or look out for any of his courses and coursework. You can find all of that in the links below. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Take care and talk soon.